Let us take a moment to honor and remember those from the Crossfield community who sacrificed with their lives. During World War I, Lieutenant Colonel Boyle, Captain M. Boyle, Private O. Alexander, R. Cogan, Private G. Cornwall, Private Dawson, W. B. Edwards, Private L. Harper, Private L. Hughes, Private F. Levick, R. Landsberg, and Private T. Morrison. From World War II, we remember Flying Officer Bill Grant, Petty Officer Warren Hall, Flying Officer James Harrison, Flight Sergeant K. Reap, Flying Officer Bill Hagee, Flight Sergeant E. Harper, Squadron Leader Albin Lott, Petty Officer Ross Lott, Flying Officer Hugh Weigel, Flying Officer Murray O'Neill, Private R. Thompson, Private R. Phillips, Private G. L. Pagan, and Gunner R. McLeod.
Good morning, students, staff, and members of the community. Welcome to the 2020 Remembrance Day ceremony. We would like everyone to please rise as we acknowledge the land and remain standing as we sing O Canada.
What the land means to me is it's the home of the people who were here before us and those people. So it's about the past. Where we walk is where other generations have walked.
One of the most important things about life is stories. It's about experiences, places that we've probably never been to before, stories about Na'a, the land. And those stories are very important because it shares with us the things that we need to know about life. In our teachings, we always go back to Mother Earth, Na'a, and this is part of it. And coming here, making that connection and that kinship with the land is where you really begin to feel the sacredness, the heartbeat of Na'a, which is very important. And that's where the source of life and our way of life begins.
Please be seated. Thank you, W.G. Murdoch Band. At this time, I would like to call Mr. Keenan, principal of W.G. Murdoch High School, to bring opening marks to this ceremony.
Welcome to our 2020 Remembrance Day celebration for W.G. Murdoch and Crossfield Elementary Schools. This time of year is a time where we pause to remember those who have come before us and given the ultimate sacrifice, along with the veterans who are still with us and have served in honor of our country. We wouldn't enjoy the freedoms that we have today and the wonderful country that we live in had we not had the experience of having these veterans serve for us. So over the coming minutes, please take a moment to pause, reflect, and think back on those in your life who have served and granted you the ability to live the life that you choose.
Please welcome our Member of Parliament, Blake Richards, for opening remarks regarding this day of reflection.
November 11th marked the end of the First World War more than 100 years ago. And today we pause to reflect on the bravery of the men and women who have served our country both then and since then. It's a day for us to remember those who died for our country and an opportunity to thank those who continue to serve Canada. Our soldiers have represented our nation proudly across the world and have bravely fought tyrants. Canada's armed forces have never wavered in defending our values across the world. And thanks to Canadian courage, the world is a safer and more peaceful place. As we proudly remember our heroes by wearing poppies and watching Remembrance Day ceremonies, let us never forget the profound impact of our brave men and women. Soldiers not much older than you in some cases, that flew across the world to fight for freedom. They left their families behind, and they suffered through freezing temperatures and had a hunger for a peaceful Canada. And many of them would not return. But because of their courage, we can go to school safely, and we can spend time with our friends and loved ones without fear. So we remember today that we can never take our peace for granted, and we must never assume our freedom. Honoring our heroes may be done a little differently this year, but I hope that everyone takes the chance to remember their sacrifice today and every day, lest we forget.
This day on the 11th month, on the 11th hour, we recognize the sacrifices made more than 90 years ago. During the First World War, we recognize the sacrifices made today by our armed forces. Ordinary people became heroes by standing up for peace, freedom, and justice. To help us remember, we light this candle.
In 1914, Canada's population was 7.5 million people. Within 3 weeks of the outbreak of World War I, 45,000 citizens had volunteered for the military service. On October 3rd and 4th of 1914, the first 30,000 Canadian troops set sail for England. The Great War lasted until 1918. When the war ended, Canadians began looking for ways to honor their dead. For many years after the war, children stood with their parents on Remembrance Day. Everyone was silent and everyone wore a poppy. In memory of those who lost their lives in World War I, we light this candle.
During the Second World War, Canadians again were called upon to take on dangerous and difficult tasks. Statistics show over 1 million Canadians were participants in World War II. When the Second World War was over, more people than ever wore a poppy. They stood in silence to remember those lost during the battles of war. These Canadians went to war to protect our country. They died so that we could enjoy all the good things in life. We light this candle in memory of those who lost their lives during World War II. In June 1950, the forces of North Korea crossed the 38th parallel into the Republic of Korea, and so began the Korean conflict. As a member of the United Nations, Canada took up arms in support of peace and freedom. More than 26,000 Canadians served in the Korean War. 516 lost their lives. In memory of those Canadians who gave their lives in Asia, we light this candle.
The wars, Canadians returned home. They married, raised families, and worked hard to build businesses, farms, and community spirits. Sadly, with the passing of the years, many of these veterans have passed away. They have left their families and comrades to continue their quest for freedom and peace. We pay tribute to the veterans for their invaluable services to our community and our country. We light this candle in memory of the veterans who have passed away.
The concept of peacekeeping is an important part of Canadian history. Canadians have participated in virtually every United Nations peacekeeping operation since the 1950s. More than 100 Canadian peacekeepers have lost their lives, and hundreds more have been injured. In honor of our peacekeepers, those Canadians who served Canada and the United Nations in the service of peace, we light this candle.
September 11, 2001, terrorism struck. As North Americans, Canadians were touched by the violence and uncertainty. We were young children. We may not remember the falling of the Twin Towers, but we live with the resulting uneasiness that only war and world conflict can bring. Our country has joined other nations to fight a war against terrorism. We light this candle as a memorial to those who have lost their lives as a result of terrorism and as a tribute to those serving our country.
Members of the Canadian Armed Forces are seeing military action in Afghanistan. Many soldiers have returned home to Canada in flag-draped caskets, casualties of war. A few of the young soldiers killed were from Saskatchewan. They grew up as we do. They attended school, spent time with family and friends, enjoyed sports, and cheered for the Saskatchewan Rough Riders. They could have been our brothers or sisters or cousins or friends. These young Canadians must be remembered for their supreme sacrifice. It is up to us to remember. We light this candle in memory of the Canadians killed in Afghanistan.
On October 22nd, 2014, the breath caught in the throat of every Canadian when the news of the shooting reached them. Corporal Nathan Cirillo was killed while serving as an honor guardsman for the tomb of the unknown soldier. The greatest testament to the reverence that we will have in every Canadian we fell in battle. This day will be forever seared in the minds of every citizen, for it is the most heinous act that our nation has ever seen. Desecration of Canada's past, present, and future dead. We light this candle in memory of Corporal Cirillo and every other armed serviceman who died in the defense of our country.
More than 1.4 million young Canadians have volunteered to serve in our military and merchant navy. More than 116,000 have given their lives. Our lifetime has been one of the most violent periods in human history. Yet, we have given the privilege of living in a peaceful country. As a youth of this country, we light this candle as an expression of our gratitude for Canada, for peace, and for freedom.
Thank you, WGM students. Master Warrant Officer Wyatt Pekka will be introducing our guest speaker, Chief Warrant Officer Mike Golly.
Good morning. My name is Master Warrant Officer Pekka. I am the QMSI at 3016 Calgary Highlanders, and it is my honor to present the guest speaker for today. Chief Warrant Officer Mike Gully grew up in Lethbridge, Alberta, and enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in 1988. He served as a soldier in the artillery, infantry, and special forces. He retired from active service in 2017 after 29 years. Chief Warrant Officer Gully continues to serve in the military on a part-time basis as a Camp Sergeant Major at the Rocky Mountain Cadet Training Center near Cochrane, Alberta during the summer months. During his service, Chief Warrant Officer Gully was posted to the Canadian Forces Base, Petawawa, Ontario, the Dwyer Hill Training Center, Ontario, and the Canadian Forces Base in Edmonton, Alberta. He served in the 2nd Regiment of the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery as an airborne gunner. He also served in the 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, as an airborne rifleman in an airborne mortar platoon and a mountain company. His service with the Special Forces included being a member of Joint Task Force 2 and the Canadian Special Operations Regiment. Currently, Chief Warrant Officer Gully is the president of the Canadian Special Operations Regiment Association, a veteran service organization for the regiment. He resides in Sedalia, Alberta, with his wife and wife, Laura, and they have 2 grown children.
My name is Chief Warrant Officer Mike Gawley, and I want to thank you for taking the time today to participate in this Remembrance Day service. Even in the challenging times we live in today, it's important for us to remember together, even if we can't actually be together. For all of us, 2020 will likely be recalled as a time when society needed to band together to make universal sacrifice for the greater good and a better future. Today, we are sacrificing our social activities, time with family, and the freedom to travel abroad as we please. This reminds me of hearing the stories from my grandparents, of the sacrifices they had to make during the Second World War. Back in those days, they told me, items much needed for the war effort were rationed. Canadians became avid recyclers of material that could be repurposed for the war effort. Men were conscripted or otherwise enrolled into military service here in Canada so that volunteers could serve overseas in Europe or the Pacific. For 6 years, Canadians here at home had to endure material shortages as well as the uncertainty of their loved ones' safety. They also worried about the outcome and hoped they would remain free citizens in a great country, not conquered and oppressed. Thankfully, they did, and we are very lucky to live in a free society today. It has been 118 years since the Canadian Army came back from the South African War. Since then, Canada participated in the Great War, the Second World War, the Korean War, various peacekeeping missions. And only 6 years ago, Canadians came home from the Afghan War. To say someone comes back from a war is a reference to a physical return from the war zone. All the generations who served in war zones, or peace support operations likely did not return the same people as they were when they left. And we are here to remember the many who never returned at all. Technology has changed a lot since the South African War ended in 1902. But the nature of warfare remains violent, tragic, and full of loss. People are destroyed physically and mentally. Families are torn by missing or lost loved ones. The thirst, fear, and exhaustion felt by the soldiers in the Great War were felt by our current veterans in the deserts of Afghanistan only a few years ago, and more recently in Iraq. The universal joy of surviving an attack is often overtaken by the guilt that others did not. For soldiers, this stuff hasn't changed, I'm sure, since wars began. History is filled with state and non-state actors who prey on the weak and oppress those they feel are either inferior to them or who they should dominate and control. Regardless of their reasoning, it counters the Canadian values of freedom, equality, respect, and the rule of law. The recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq are prime examples. The Afghan and Iraqi people I've met on my tours there are no different than anyone else I've met. Most of them want a better life for their children. They want access to education, health care, and the opportunities that come with security. It's hard to hold down a job or go to school when you are under a real threat of violence for doing so. In Iraq, a radically violent group called Daesh went after a group of people because they had different religious beliefs, the Yazidi people. Daesh is commonly known as ISIS. I prefer to use the term Daesh because it's correct and because I know they don't like it. The nightmare the Yazidi people suffered at the hands of Daesh could have been a lot worse had Canada and her allies not intervened to protect them and help contain Daesh. War is a nasty thing, and these operations take their toll on the soldiers, sailors, aviators, and special forces operators who serve on them. Remembrance Day is the day we have each year to pause and embrace each other as patriots, grateful that we can do so, and remember those many souls who did not return from their service. It's an opportunity to acknowledge the visible and invisible wounds that come from combat in the defense of our values and facing those who wish us or our friends in the world harm, and taking on those who wish to oppress others using violence, misinformation, and intimidation. Oppression designed to keep them from the freedoms we have and that we may take for granted sometimes. For many of our veterans, Remembrance Day is every day. I want to share a very unique story with you. A good friend and I served in the infantry together for many years. One day, he showed me a story written on a piece of paper. He liked the story so much he had it framed. The words on this cherished paper described the close friendship and bonds that exists between warriors. Years later, he and I deployed to Afghanistan in 2002. We had been in country for a few months when he was severely wounded. In the middle of the night, he lay in the dirt, in darkness, bleeding out. He couldn't see. Some of his gear was on fire. Through the darkness came his buddy to render aid to him, and he saved his life by tending to his bleeding and keeping him warm until the helicopters came. That was 18 years ago, and recently he recorded this old story, which he cherished so much. It is truly meaningful because he lived it.
During World War I, a soldier discovered that his friend, wounded, had fallen between the trenches out in no man's land. Turning to his commanding officer, he asked, "Sir, may I go and get him?" The officer replied curtly, "No one can live out there. I would just lose you as well." But ignoring the officer's command, he dashed from the safety of the trench to try to save his friend. With his friend on his shoulder, but now himself mortally wounded, he staggered and fell back into the trenches. The friend, they discovered, was now dead. The officer, in lofty tones, rebuked him. "You fool! I told you not to go. Now I've lost both of you. It wasn't worth it." With his dying breath, the brave soldier replied, "But sir, it was worth it." The officer was unimpressed. "Worth it?" he retorted. "Rubbish. Your friend is dead, and you soon will be." With his final words, he said, "It was worth it, sir, because when I got to him, he said, 'Jim, I knew you'd come.'" Out there is the devil's no man's land. Our friends are harboring a secret, often unrealized hope that we will come with some rescue from an ever-increasing hopelessness. The tragedy is that our commanding officer, rather than rebuking Fuel's impetuousness and rushing to their aid, has commanded that we leave the safety of the fold shelter and the companionship of the 90 and 9 to go and bring them in. There are no seasons to the search. It goes on around the clock throughout the calendar. No one is excused from the task. All are commanded to go. I don't know what reasons you might conjure up for not going or for the possibility of failure. All I know is that your friends are out there. Wounded, dying, waiting. Will you hear them say, I knew you'd come?
He's an amazing soldier, and so are the guys who saved him. Tragically, others didn't make it that night, but they too had friends rush to them and try. They were the first Canadian casualties in the Afghan War. And tragically, Canada suffered more casualties in the years that followed. There is no glorifying war when we remember our fallen. There's no glory in the hell a family goes through when they stare across to the empty place at the table once occupied by their lost loved one. As part of Remembrance, I urge you to research the history of Canadian conflicts because it is a story of us and our compatriots. It is also the story of Canada, a place where people have always come to escape war and live free, equal, respected, and protected by the rule of law. Thank you for attending this service and remembering our fallen. They shall not grow old, and we shall remember them.
Thank you. We will now have the Crossfield Elementary School's grade 5 classes recite In Flanders Fields.
In Flanders Fields, by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. In Flanders Fields, the poppies grow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly scarcer amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
The W.G. Murdoch community will now perform Imagine by John Lennon.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Ooh. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one.
possessions. It's easy if you can. No need for greed or hunger, brotherhood of men. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You
may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Please keep your attention to our photo montage, prepared by Madame Petkoff and Ms. Hupfer. We thank all the families who were able to submit photos of loved ones to help honor and remember those who have served or are serving.
Just yesterday morning, they let me know you were gone. Suzanne, the plans they made put an end to you. I walked out this morning and I wrote down this song. I just can't remember who to send it to. I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend. But I always thought that I'd see you again. Won't you look down upon me, Jesus? You gotta help me make a stand. You just got to see me through another day. My body's aching and my time is at hand. I won't make it any other way. Whoa, I've seen fire and I've seen rain. Seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend. But I always thought that I'd see you again. Been walking my mind to an easy time, my back turned towards the sun. Lord knows when the cold wind blows, it'll turn your head around. Well, there's hours of time on the telephone line to talk about things to come. Sweet dreams and flying machines in pieces on the ground. Whoa, I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend. But I always thought that I'd see you, baby, one more time again now. Thought I'd see you one more time again. There's just a few things coming my way this time around now. Thought I'd see you, thought I'd see you right
please rise and join us in the act of remembrance. I would ask the audience to recite the response on the screen when displayed. Please remain standing for the last post. We will then observe 2 minutes of silence.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
They were young as we are young. They served, giving freely of themselves. To them we pledge, amid the winds of time, to carry the torch and never forget. We will remember them.
I would now like to welcome Crossfield Elementary School staff member, Mr. Rogers, to bring closing remarks.
Good morning. My name is Bob Rogers, and I have the privilege of being the principal of Crossfield Elementary School. I have also had the privilege of being a teacher at W.G. Murdoch, of serving in the Canadian Armed Forces, and of being the secretary at the Crossfield Legion. And so, on behalf of CES, W.G. Murdoch, and the Crossfield Legion, I would like to thank you for having taken the time to participate in this year's virtual Remembrance Day service. I would also like to thank Chief Warrant Officer Gawley for sharing his story, the Honorable Blake Richards, the staff and students of the 2 Crossfield schools, as well as the WGM Band, WGM leadership students, Miss Leslie Ann Petkoff, Miss Shannon Booth, and Miss Rochelle Hoopfer at WGM, Miss Jackie Kiernan at CES, and President Todd Kiernan and past President Brenda Watt of the Crossfield Legion, as well as all the members of their teams for putting together this virtual Remembrance Day ceremony. This year brought new challenges for our annual ceremony, and I appreciate the work done by everyone who created this virtual event. I mentioned privilege a moment ago, and I often reflect on privilege at this time every year. I remember that I, and all of us, have the privilege of living in a country where we have been given the freedom to make choices about our lives that are denied to many around the world. Choices such as who will lead us, where we will live, and whether we will serve in the military or not. These choices, these privileges, have been given to us by the many men and women who have chosen to serve on our behalf. I was saddened to hear that one of those soldiers, Corporal James Choi of the Royal Westminster Regiment, was killed last week while on a training exercise at Wainwright, Alberta. The loss of Corporal Choi is a stark reminder of the dangers faced by the members of the Canadian Armed Services, whether serving during wartime, on peacekeeping missions, or while training at home. Their service and sacrifices has, and continues to, grant us the many privileges that we enjoy as Canadians. It is for that reason that we pause every 11th of November to think of them and reflect on all that they have given us. On this day, we remember them.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I would like to thank everyone for their attention and attendance this morning.